Welcome back to another recording of the Joyful Mate podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Hartcher, the Joyful Journey Mentor, and I'm in the process of writing a book. And hence why this podcast evolved was for my book writing. I figured I'm not a very good writer, or I'm not someone that can sit and write, but I'm okay at talking. So I thought I would start a podcast at the same time as writing a book. And this is well and truly into the journey, because I started the podcast November 2024, and I'm recording this in the 7th of May in 2025. So it's been a good 6-month journey, and I've loved every minute of it. When I started out on writing a book about happiness. And yes, it's evolved. It's evolved on my initial concept of happiness, because my understanding of happiness and joy has evolved, and it's been a process in understanding what brings about happiness, what brings about joy. And ultimately, I arrived at the conclusion of connectedness. And then I'm thinking, okay, ultimately, we're on a journey to feel connected with self, connected with others, connected with the world, and connected with everything. So that was where I arrived with my research and interviews with people, experts in the field of mental health, people, neuroscientists I interviewed, and I was reading a lot of information around, neuroscience, scientific journals, and it really all led me to this understanding that we're seeking this connectedness, and connectedness in many ways, not just in just the one form of connectedness. It's connected in every way possible, but we get those connections over time. We build connections over time. And throughout this research, I was in this real, divergence phase. So I was thinking of all these concepts and wanting to bring them together. And so it just led me on many pathways, many rabbit holes. And I'm doing this recording now, and it's thinking, okay, I've been on all this divergent journey. It's time to get some convergence, and time to get, put the rubber on the road, so to speak, and actually get a manifest, a script written. And so this is the first edition, although I thought, when I was first recording the Joyful Mate podcast, it was just thoughts and concepts, and it helped me start the book writing journey. It helped me get in the mode, in the habit of writing a book. But as I said, I'm speaking a book. So I'm using transcripts and editing the transcripts. This is the first real attempt at that. And I just wanted to take you along on the journey, because I want you to realize that a finished product has to start somewhere. And you've probably got big dreams that you want to manifest. And it just seems so big that you just don't know where to start, and you get lost on that starting point. What I suggest you do is just make a start, like I did. I set up a podcast, started talking. The first few episodes of the podcast were all over the place, total wish-wash. However, it got me into a habit, and I've maintained that habit to the point now that I'm really ready to get something. And my goal is to have this published by the end of the year. So I'm starting the writing process now, and I want to get the manuscript pretty much done by the end of the year is my goal. And the book's title is Feeling Broken, A Pathway to Self-Love and Healing. Yeah, so that whole concept of feeling broken arose from me realizing the ultimate form that we're seeking is this form of connectedness. And in order to get there, we are pretty much doing what I'm doing in writing this book. And it's all these parts. You're bringing together all these parts of you and your understanding, and bringing them together and molding them, and realizing in that process that there's really nothing missing, that you're always looking for that missing piece, but that missing piece was never actually missing. It was the fact that you weren't accepting you for who you were. So one of the first parts of the journey really starts in childhood. And if you look at your childhood, you realize that it was all about you learning how to survive in the world, and you learning the ropes of your parents. And so you look up to them for inspiration. You look up to your parents for that, what do I do next, mum? What do I do next, dad? And so you're constantly in search of that answer to help you get through, to help you, like, I'm feeling hungry and I need you to meet my needs. I've, got rid of some waste products. I need you to help clean me. It doesn't feel comfortable. I've got this tummy that doesn't feel right. Can you help alleviate that tummy? And so you're always seeking this help from mum and dad. And that help from mum and dad, if mum and dad aren't there, it's someone else. And so there's always someone there to help you through those initial stages of life. And so we're looking externally for the answers to help fulfill our needs within. And that's our journey in childhood. And that continues to the point where we start to develop an ability to start doing things for ourselves. And so we need less of mum and dad, and because we're able to do these things ourselves. However, there's still things that we're learning. We're still learning life, and we're still asking mum and dad for answers. And so we keep asking questions and we keep getting answers. And we need to remember that mum and dad only know what they know, right? So they're doing it under their best understanding of life and what's best for you. So they've got the best intentions. Although you may realize later on in life what they shared with you in those early stages, some of those things they shared, you find, I don't know how true that is. And you start to question that. And it wasn't that your parents were lying to you. They were sharing with what they knew at that time that was best for you, or they thought was best for you. However, what I've realized is that we give love according to how we like to receive love. And it's questionable whether it's actually love or we're striving for some form of connection. Love's unconditional. And I think, our realization of love grows. Initially, it's quite conditional. If you do this, I'll love you. But that's not real love, right? So it's sort of, I'll do this and I'll support you because you're supporting me. And it's sort of a fair and equal exchange, but it's putting a condition around love. And so what we realize in time is that there's no boundary to love. There's no conditions. We can't box love. It's endless, unlimited. We have this, and there's no bounds, and it's basically hard to define. Anyone, struggles to define it. So I think for me, it is accepting that love is boundless. Love is limitless. Love is unconditional. However, people have different opinions around what love is. And so it can, I guess, your understanding of what love is going to vary depending on your experiences and your upbringing and what people shared with you during your upbringing. Ultimately, people are coming from a point of caring. But in saying that, what I've realized is that every individual wants their needs fulfilled, because that's how we get along in life, is by fulfilling our needs. And so we have this selfish motive. All of us have this selfish motive, and we're wanting to fulfill those needs, and we're looking for others to help us fulfill those needs, to get support, because as human beings, we work best together. Okay, we don't work great in isolation. We work well as a pack. And so we're wanting to fit in with the pack, at the same time meet our needs, but at the same time, help others with their needs in order to stay connected with that pack to help us survive. And that initial pack in your early stage of life is that initial family, your siblings, your parents, or it could be carers. And so that's your pack. And that's the pack that you're really seeking. And mind you, depending on where you're raised in the world, that pack could be quite a village, right? So I've recently visited Africa, a country called Uganda, and I found that you really see the village raise a child when you're over there. It's incredible. A lot different to my upbringing. So, but getting back to the point is you're relying on that pack to meet your needs and they support your needs. And that's how we grow up. And that's how we survive in those early because we can't survive on our own. And humans generally struggle to survive on their own. We're always needing, I guess, one another in some form, and that will vary how much we need other people to really thrive in life. So, my personal instance, I don't need a lot of. I like doing it my way. I like working it out myself. I've always been like that ever since I was a kid. Whereas I know my wife, she likes to work it out with others. So her need is to work it out with you. My need is to work it out by myself. And you can see they're very different. And I'll get on to relationships later on. So, as those early phases of life, we're looking up to others for help and support, connection, and ultimately that helps us survive and helps us meet our basic needs. Now, it creates some sort of dependency, and that dependency can remain with us depending on our carers. So, our carers, I'm referring to parents, siblings, anyone that's providing support to you, is that they may continue to help you even though you're quite capable. And so that dependency is prolonged. So you don't develop your independence as early as some others will. And so this also is like, if you look at some people's lives, they get less support in the early phases, but they become more independent quickly and they mature a lot faster than those getting a lot of support. And so it's not that one form is better than the other. It is what it is. There's pros and cons to both. So I don't want you to think that I didn't get a lot of love when I was growing up. I didn't have this loving family, because the benefit of not having that is that you worked it out yourself and you became very resourceful and creative yourself, because you had to rely on yourself more than what you could on others. And so that matures you faster. It helps you accelerate your independence. Whereas others getting a lot of support have a much slower pathway to that independence. And some people can still have a lot of dependence on others when growing up if they formed a strong attachment to it. And various reasons will drive that attachment, because if you had some earlier struggles, whether it be some big challenges, then you become more dependent on those others around you for that security and that comfort and that support. And so you form stronger bonds, stronger attachments because of what you're going through. And that will hold strong for quite some time until the people, the carers or the supporters start letting go, right? And they might not happen depending on, societal views of how much support you need based on labels. And there's, many labels that you could get defined, so certainly I grew up in this, we used to call it disabled. Now we don't call it disabled because they're able in other ways. So they're not really everyone. I have a disability. I have a disability in trying to string words together. But yeah, so again, special needs is probably what it's referred to today. And I think that somewhat creates a stronger dependence attachment for longer periods of time, is if you're defined with that label, needing special needs. There's certainly many cases out there where people that so-called special needs didn't get the special attention or specific support that they get today and still thrived. And so it's not that you need it. It's not that one's right or wrong. It's just different. And as I said, it will either accelerate your growth and independence, or it will hamper that growth and independence. So where I'm getting to is, from early ages of life, we have this dependence. We have this attachment to survival through others. And that will continue through childhood and becomes less so as we become more independent over time. because we become more resourceful ourselves. And we then have this curiosity of wanting to explore my way of doing things. And that's finding yourself. And so we go through these teenage years where we're thinking, okay, now I want to explore life a bit. I'm curious about life. And so therefore I want to go on this exploration. And hence those teenage years where you're trying different things and you don't want mum and dad's support. And that's you becoming independent. And that's where mum and dad need to start letting go. And it's hard for them because they've been, I guess, you've been a big part of their life in terms of them, you relying on them, and that's formed an attachment from your parents' point of view. So they're needing to detach, and you're wanting to, well, you strive for that, right? You're seeking that more independence as you go through teenage years. But what is happening during those teenage years, you're finding out who you are. And in that process, we look around to others to help us better understand ourselves. And so we do this compare and contrast with others. And so we're looking at others, what they have, and looking at ourselves, what we perceive that we don't have, and how we're different or how we're common. And ultimately, we're looking for commonality to find connection. But through that comparing and contrast and looking for commonality, we're also finding differences. And so ultimately, it really depends on what you focus on is what you see. So if you're looking for commonality and you want to find commonality to fit in, you'll find commonality and you will feel that you're fitting in. If you look for differences, you'll find differences and you'll struggle and be awkward about fitting in. And so that's, again, comes down to this concept around how we perceive the world. And that perception of the world will depend on our upbringing and what filters our parents instill within us. And that's beliefs, their beliefs, how they see the world, right? And so we hardwire them into our brain and how we filter the world. And so we will initially go through the exploration phase during the teenage years as I guess, well, sort of trying to see it from our parents' lens. And then we'll start to see that others don't see it from our parents' lens. And then we start to question. We start to think, who's right and who's wrong? Am I, or you become prideful and think, no, the way my parents see the world is the right way and my friend's wrong. And then obviously you see differences. Or you could, and so that's going to bring up, I guess, differences with your friends. Ultimately, the concept around differences helps us grow because we start to broaden our lens if we have an open mind to broadening our lens. But the difficulty is during the teenage years, there's this element of still wanting to be loved, or still wanting to feel connected. And so we'll do things to what we think will gain that connection. So if we see people getting attention for doing this, then we will probably want to mimic that in order to get that attention. And so we're still wanting that connection, but it's beyond the connection with parents. So we're looking to broaden our connection, broaden our tribe, broaden our people, or the people that, and so we can, in order to feel connected with others, we can do more of the things that they want us to do, and we have less significance on our parent relationship. So we'll do less to please the parents and more to please other people in order to fit in with this other group, to feel significantly or valued beyond our family. And so we are finding ourselves in this process because we're trialing these different things, and we do these different things because other people have done them and got attention, and they either sit well with us or they don't sit well with us. And sometimes you think, okay, I did what the other people did, but I'm not getting the attention. And then you start questioning, what's wrong with me? I did exactly what, this popular person did, and they got lots of attention and I'm not. And so I think this is a big challenge with teenagers going through adolescence these days is that comparison is far greater than ever before because of social media. And so you can compare yourself to people all over the world in any one time by just looking at your screen. However, in my day, and when I was growing up, it was only possible for me to compare myself with the people I was hanging out with. And I do a compare and contrast with them. And when I wasn't with them, I wasn't doing compare and contrast. And so, but the problem today is that kids are not only comparing and contrasting with their people around them, but when they're not with those people, then they're comparing and contrasting with people all around the world. And so this starts really fragmenting someone because they're starting to see a whole lot of other people's beliefs and understanding of the world and different values, and they start to question theirs. And if they look up to that person, they will put a higher value on the other person's and lesser value on theirs. And so they start to disconnect with themselves in order to fit in with a much bigger group and feel big and part of something bigger. And this really drives that point I mentioned at the start, was around this connectedness. We want to feel connected. And so we initially have this connection with parents, and then we bank that connection and think, well, that's there. I've already got that connection. I want to broaden my connection. And so you're on this connection with more people. And this sort of goes down to this concept of the one and the many. And the one and the many happens at all scales of life and across all societies, across all religions, across no matter what category you look at, there's this one and the many. And so if I want to best explain this concept, probably let's start with some, I guess, two core natural concepts, which is the sun and gravity, right? So what holds us on planet Earth and connected to planet Earth is gravity. And what keeps us in orbit around the sun is this whole sense of gravity. And so we have this, so gravity's taking the many humans, the many objects on the planet to connect it with the one source of gravity. And so it's the one, which is gravity, connecting many. And then the sun is one source of light, but it's got many radii. So it goes off directionless. It goes off everywhere. And so it goes from one source to many receivers. And so that's that concept. Now, if you look at your organs, for example, it's one organ, but it's made up of many cells. And that one organ is part of a system, and many systems make up the human body. If you look at Christianity, so you've got the one God, but there's many forms. The trilogy, so there's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit make up the one God. So there's one God with many expressions of that God through the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. If you look at society, for example, it's a collective of different, many religions make up a collective of a societal group, or, there's many ways in which you can frame this. So when we come into the world, our many is small, and that's the family and those close to us. And then that many becomes broader. And so this comparing and contrasting goes on bigger scales, much larger scales. And we start to then find ourselves through others, but in that process, we feel fragmented because of this comparing and contrasting at much larger scales. And so this is happening much more than ever so before, simply because the compare and contrast in the search of finding ourselves is at massive scales compared to what it used to be. And so what this then makes us feel that we are in pieces, that there's, and so we we break ourselves into pieces in this compare and contrast and think, yes, I like this about me, but I don't like this. I like this on what the other person has, but I don't have that. Well, the perception is you don't have that. You do, but in another form. So I'll get into that concept later. And so, because it's the concept that ultimately nothing is missing, it's just in a different form. And this comes back to the concept of, and I need to share another concept, which is the law of conservation. So it's the first law of thermodynamics. And this law states that nothing, so energy cannot be created or destroyed. It's only transformed from one form to another. Matter cannot be created or destroyed, but only transformed from one form to another. So what it means is that ultimately at the highest level in the universe, that everything's conserved, but it's in a constant state of flux, transformation. And so there's really, at any point in time, there's nothing missing. It's just in a different form that we're not recognizing because of the way we filter the world. So I'll get to that concept later on in the book, but I just need to continue with this development of you comparing yourself to others, feeling that something's missing in you because you're putting more value on what the other person's got. And so this could become so if you look at teenagers, what's most important to them is still survival. And ultimately, they're developing more independence, but it's all about them and them finding themselves at the same time feeling that all their needs are being met. So they're still looking for meeting their own needs, but wanting to connect with others. And so they'll start to recognize other people's needs and start to forgo their needs a bit to help fulfill others to find that connection. And so that's happening at some degree. At the same time, they're better understanding themselves through others in this compare and contrast, and looking at themselves and looking at, comparing their family to other people's families, comparing what they have and what they don't have. And so from a material point of view, from a physical point of view in terms of their body, and ultimately that is to feel, because when we see commonality, we see connectedness. When we see differences, then ultimately that leads to stronger connectedness if we see it that way. But if we're seeing more differences, then we feel more and more disconnected. And so this ultimately will depend on your lens. As I said, we're filtering the world through our own lens. We're not seeing it as it is. We're seeing it through our own filters, and those filters are very much shaped by our parents and the people that helped us earlier on in life. And those filters are constantly being created based on experiences, and also diversifying at the same time based on experiences, because we are understanding others and seeing that they see the world differently to us. And then we're thinking, I never thought of seeing it that way. And that's broadens your lens up. So this lens will go through this constant expansion and contraction based on your experiences. So, if it's an experience that you're being really challenged and struggling with, then your lens will get quite constricted. If you're in a state of flow and growth, then it's more open and expansive. And so this expansion and contraction will go in waves. And I just wanted to touch on this point because I think one of the concerns that I see with my clients is that they think life should be linear, that we should be constantly achieving or constantly moving forward. But sometimes we need to move back in order to move forward. We need to stop in order to move forward. And so this brings me to this another fact about life is, if you look at life at its basic fundamental level, it's particles and waves. And so it's like, if you look at energy can be a particle or a wave, right? And if you look at waves, they're pulses, and they're different magnitudes, right? So they're not constant magnitude, and are not at the constant same pulse. And so there's variation in the magnitude, variation in the frequency. And that's pretty much how life continues, is that some days you'll have incredible energy and you'll achieve a lot. And then other days, the magnitude's not there, right? And you feel, well, what's wrong with me? There's nothing wrong with you. That's life. And it's this, again, this unrealistic expectation on life is that we will have this linear energy, that our energy should be continuous at the same intensity. But at the most fundamental form of energy, particles and waves, there's continuity there, but it's not a linear continuity. It's not a linear continuity. It's pulse-like. So you want to ride the wave. So when you've got the energy, ride with it. When you don't have the energy, go with the wave. And that's what I've learned. It's taking me, I'm approaching 50, right? In writing this book. I've really only just got this now. So again, if you're reading this book and you're like at the start of your journey, don't be hard on yourself. I guess it's stand on the shoulders of others and learn from others. And again, go on your journey. That's the other thing I've really learned, is it's doing it your way, doing life your way, in terms of, again, it's not copying exactly others. It might be thinking that that's very aligned to my values, but you got to do it in your way. And it's your authentic journey to a similar outcome. It won't be exactly the same. So yeah, just getting back to this constant thing. So, we don't want again, it's unrealistic expectations to think that you're going to have this constant energy and constant linear journey. It's going to be ups and downs. And so I was sharing this in light of your filter and how you perceive the world, and it will go through expansions and contractions based on your experience. And it's going to be pulse-like, and the magnitudes are going to be different. Some days you'll be super open-minded, right? And you'll think, yeah, I'm a sponge. I'm so curious. I just want to learn more. And there'll be other days I can't learn anymore. I just don't have the energy. And that is life. So just go with the wave. When you're learning, learn. When you've got the energy to learn. But then there's days you need to stop and reflect. And that's consolidation. Again, I said sometimes we need to take 2 steps back, and that's stripping. Again, I have this concept around pruning. So there's things and baggage and stuff that will accumulate that is people's stuff that we don't need to carry. And so we need to prune that. There'll be stuff that we've learnt that we need to unlearn. So we need to prune that. And so it's this, just like a bush does, it grows, and then when it's trimmed, it explodes in growth again. And so that's how we want to do, I guess, our growth, is allow for that expansion and go with it, but then realize that at some point there's got to be some trimming. And so I went through this with my degrees and what I learned through, the whole education process, actually. So I've, in order to grow, I've had to unlearn and be open to learning new concepts, because if I think I know, then I've got a closed mind. I'm not open to questioning what I know. So science evolves through constant questioning the current science, and through constantly questioning and asking better questions, we get a better knowing. But we don't arrive at a sense of knowing everything. That's an evolution. That's a constant journey. And so you want to see your understanding of self is a constant journey. So getting to know you is a constant journey. You may be starting on that journey now through reading this book. And I want you to realize this is just the beginning. So even once you finish this book, your journey to discovering yourself continues. And again, this book is here to help kickstart that, but it requires your openness to further exploring yourself and further understanding yourself, because the more you understand yourself, know thyself, the better you can relate and connect with others and everything around you. And that will help this ultimate drive for ultimate connection with everything and everyone. And we can only do that through this process of going through learning about ourselves, but reflecting on our learning, trimming what's not quite true anymore, and allowing that next stage of expansion. And so we start doing this early on in life when we start realizing that we have this ability to go forward in life by ourselves to varying degrees. And so those teenage years of further exploring that. And we start to find ourselves or lose ourselves. So we're going to go on one, either a convergent path or a divergent path. But in order to go on a convergent path, like I did with this book writing, I had to do a divergent path. I had to be open beyond my knowing, and bring in stand on the shoulders of giants and look at what I don't know and increase my knowing through that curiosity. And so this is your journey in terms of you'll feel that you're in parts at stages of your life, but those parts are helping you to come together stronger. So again, like even we can feel very connected, and then something happens, we experience something, and then we feel fragmented again. But that fragmentation is helping, well, first of all, it slows us down and allows more reflection, which is that trimming process, which enables the next stage of growth and development. So this will be this wave of life that you go through, is where you're constantly feeling at times totally broken, in pieces, and those degrees will depend on your experiences at the time and how you perceive them. And we'll talk more about that in another chapter. But I just wanted to evolve this story as to where it's going. And so don't feel that you're the only one in pieces. Everyone has this feeling and experiences this feeling of, I feel fragmented, I feel scattered, I don't feel that things are working together. But what it is, it's in a state of transformation. And ultimately, in a state of transformation, life wants to evolve and move forward. Okay. And so we want to ride that journey. But the other way it can evolve, well, not evolve, but it can disintegrate, is going in reverse. And so if you're in pieces, you can go further into pieces and feel further disconnected. And this ultimately leads to states of isolation, depression, loneliness, is when we feel so scattered and so disconnected, and we can't see any similarities between you, and because you're in so many pieces and you feel that you just can't connect with anything or anyone. And that leads to what we call depression. And like you could be reading this book and feel this way at this moment. And so what I want to do is initiate that process where you start to bring together and consolidate and start rebuilding. It's a rebuilding process. And ultimately, I want you to start that process through reading this book and then continue it. But then realize that part of the journey will be falling off the horse or falling over like we did as a kid and getting back up again, because this is the journey of life and we learn things as we go along, and everything is there to teach us something. So no matter what you experience, it's there to teach you something. However, you need to get to a point where you can be open to receiving that teaching. And I think sometimes we can lose that ability because we're so stuck. And you could be reading this and experiencing this stuck state, is that you're thinking, Anthony, hang on a sec. It can't possibly be there to teach me a lesson. It's terrible what I'm experiencing. There's no lesson to learn. And again, the reason this is all part of being human, right, is that what you do is attract in the resources by feeling the way you feel. And so you've drawn in this book because of the title. You feel the title and you want the outcome that the book is helping you on the path of, and that is self-love and healing. And so this is all about that initiating that spark within you to start continuing to draw upon the resources. Because what we need is help to be able to see and bring the parts together. And then we can see that, that was all meant to happen in hindsight. You can see it in the now. It's just hard to see when you're deep in the feeling shattered, right? When you feel completely shattered, it's hard to see the meaning behind what you're experiencing. So this is where you draw upon resources to help you find that meaning, to help you move forward. And this is why people ask, like, you don't seem your usual self, because they know that something's not right. They pick up on the energy. They pick up that you're not your usual self, and they reach out their hand. And what all you need to do is have an open mind to receiving that hand, an open mind to reading the rest of this book, so that you can stand and walk forward and continue on your life journey and continue to consolidate the pieces and strengthen those bonds between the pieces. That's what the event was meant to support, is that bonding. So you think about anything that you perceived as adverse you might not have seen this yet, but it is there. You just can't see it through your current lens. So hopefully through this book, I help alter that lens so that you can see it. You can see how that adversity helped move you forward for the better. And this is why I'm writing the book, is ultimately to bring you together in some form. I'll only get you to some point, but it's then you continuing on the journey of life that will continue you to feel more and more integrated, more and more connected. But at times you'll need to trim or break a little bit or lose a little bit, or perceive that you've lost a little bit, in order to come together stronger. And so if you look at all adverse events throughout history, throughout your life, you will realize that in time, this happens if you don't get the help, but you can realize it in the moment, that it's there to serve. If you're perceiving it as a negative, it's there to serve. If you're perceiving it as all great, then there's something that you're not seeing that's not so great. And you want to see the whole. So ultimately, it is what it is, and it's beautiful as it is. We need to see that. And the only way we can see that beauty is realizing that with every positive comes a negative, and with every negative comes a positive. And that's how we want to ultimately, for that full integration to happen, we need to realize that there's nothing missing, that the complementary opposite is there. We're just not seeing it. The meaning is there. We're not open to looking for it. So this book is to initiate you to look for it and realize that you can strengthen the bond of self-love, strengthen the bond with others, strengthen the bond with nature, strengthen the bond with everything, and feel more connected with everything through this realizing that nothing's missing and everything is whole and beautiful as it is. Nature makes no mistakes. And through the study of natural laws, I've realized that it's balanced at the highest level, but at at the level you're perceiving it, you can feel that it's totally imbalanced, but it's in a state of transformation. And that's life. Life's in a constant state of flux and transformation. But at the highest level, it's completely ordered and completely balanced. But we take transcendent thinking to see it that way. And so this brings me to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is that at the lowest basic, we need resources and support to feel secure, to feel that we can survive, or we need it to survive. And so we need those needs met. And so we can only transcend our thinking once our basic survival needs are met. We feel safe. So if you think about it, if you're running away from a tiger, then your only focus at that point in time is getting away from the tiger, because if you don't, the rest is history. It doesn't matter, right? So once we get away from that tiger, then we can see the meaning. We can see how it served us. And what you'll realize is that, hey, I've learned something new. I learned that tigers like this sort of environment. And so I'm not going to go and forage for food in that sort of climate or environment at that sort of time of day. And so we learn these things. And that's something that we then evolve in terms of we can move beyond survival and towards a more thrival thinking. However, we will have these life events that come in that help us ultimately to get to the next level of thinking, but we need to see it that way. We need to be open and curious to realize there is more. Okay, I'm just going to have a break now because I've ridden the wave of good energy and wanting to start this. I've started it. I'm going to hit pause, and we're going to come back after the break for a continuation of what I'm sharing. Well, I'm back, and hopefully you had a great break. I had a great break. I got out into the sunshine and recharged and did some reflection, consolidating and prepping and exploring concepts so that we can go into this next phase. And I just wanted to touch on a previous point, which I said life isn't a constant, and it's in a constant state of flux and transformation, which if you think about it, like in terms of people looking in, it may not appear that, or you thinking that you've got nothing to show for it. And for example, I had a client came to me and they've been working on weight loss, and they've got a measure, which is the scales, and they're saying, nothing's happening. I'm doing all this work and nothing's happening. And for me, it was a bit of that cocoon moment where you're in the cocoon, the outside world can't see any change, but inside there's so much change from within. And it's just not apparent. It's not measurable on scales from other perceptions, but they were certainly measurable. So with this client, I knew she was making huge amounts of progress in so many areas of life and really consolidating strong habits around health and lots of learning around health. And so, yeah, there was lots of transformation happening. It just wasn't in the form that she was looking for. And I was encouraging her to stick to the process, because we don't really know when that cocoon's going to shop, with the butterfly flying out, right? And that's what the outside world can see, and that's maybe her measure, right? And that's when she feels that she's had a noticeable transformation. And so we can have these transformations at a level we're just not perceiving, because we're so fixated on the outcome. We're so fixated on this form of shininess. However, there's huge amounts of transformation happening, but we're just not aware of it. We're not consciously tuned into it, tapped into that frequency. So just rounding out that conversation, it's pretty much it is happening all the time. It's just whether you're recognizing it. And you can feel stuck. However, there's areas of your life that are unstuck, that are moving forward. However, you're focused on the area that's stuck, and you think, and you conclude that everything's stuck, right? But in actual fact, there's parts that are really transforming and moving. And this really is about this cycle of life, right? So we're in a constant state of flux and transformation. And your, I guess, circle of transformation is either expanding or contracting. It's doing one or the other. And sometimes it's doing both. And hence you perceive stuckness, but there's something happening. It's just not measurable. And so one thing I'd like to share with you as my learning during that break, the ad break, it's no ad break, it's just a time for you to get a cup of coffee and tune back into what I'm sharing, is that I was outside thinking that, okay, I've shared lots of information and my thoughts are sort of a bit expansive and they're so divergent that I'm sort of losing a pathway. I could go down many pathways. And so hence I decided to take a break. And in that time I took a break, I was enabled to reflect on what I've said and shared, consolidate, and then come up with ways to reshare or continue this episode. And so I needed that pause. I couldn't just keep talking. Otherwise, this would just end up in gobbledygook. And my energy also, as I mentioned before the break, was that it comes in waves. And so my wave was coming to an end in terms of energy flow for sharing. And so I picked up on that, pressed pause, went outside, allowed the wave to pick up again by being in the sun, re-energizing, and allowing thoughts to come to me, but not forcing anything. I think this is the other thing, is we force certain outcomes. So we could try to force that weight loss outcome. And in that process of forcing it, we lose the flow and it becomes very draining in forcing an outcome. Whereas if we go with the flow, we're more able to harness the energy that we have available. When we try to force things, we deplete ourselves and then we really struggle and feel that we're static. So, and we make mistakes, or I don't like calling them mistakes, we have stumbles, so to speak. Whereas if we try to maintain the flow, we can sort of collect our balance or recollect our balance, however you say that, rebalance ourselves. And we can pick up ourselves before the fall. Whereas when we're forcing things, we generally have a fall and then we pick ourselves up. So I think that's this whole thing of life's not linear. It's in constant state of transformation. It's just whether we're aware of it through our consciousness and whether we're tuned into it, tapped into that transformation. So this book has been constantly evolving, although it can appear from the outside that what have you got to show for it, Anthony? It feels very disjointed, but there is consolidation happening. It just may not be showing. I'm hoping I'm on that consolidation path. I get a sense that I am, but there's still thoughts that come in. And I think with wanting to actually come up with a manuscript, there's a point where you got to sort of say, okay, no more divergent thinking. I got to converge. I want to get a product out there, and then I can do a part 2 or a series 2 or a version 2, right? A new edition. So I need to accept that I want to get to a point where I have something that you can follow easily and coherently, as opposed to a constant wish-wash. So it's a bit like I was sharing with my client in terms of trying to explain the analogy of what's happening is like when you have dirty clothes, right? But they're not 100% dirty. You judge them as being dirty, but there's parts of it that are quite clean, right? And someone else could say, they could pick it up and say, that's not dirty at all, right? So it's all these perceptions. And that's all based on our filters. And so just say you perceive it as dirty, but in actual fact, it's not 100% dirty, but you put it in the wash. So therefore it goes into the wash, but it's not 100% dirty. There's an element, parts of it that are okay, clean, it's all relative. But it goes through a washing cycle. And during that washing cycle, the clean becomes cleaner, the dirtier becomes slightly less dirty. And it's in this cycle, right? But there's, at any point in that cycle, there's clean and there's dirty. It's entangled together. And the output is supposedly clean clothes. But as you know, with cleaning anything, it's not 100%. It never, returns to the original condition. And so this is a bit like our growth cycle and our learning cycle and our perception of how we perceive life. there's always this entanglement where there's areas of life that are progressing and areas of life that we perceive that are stuck. But it's only because we're attached to a certain form that needs, we thinking, I need to be here at this certain date. And I have clients come to me and say, look, I'm turning 30 and I'm just not happy because my expectation was at 30 I'll have this, and this ticked, and they don't have this, and this ticked. But they're not focusing on what they have. They're focusing on what's missing. But in actual fact, they've got everything they need in that moment that was meant to be there, and it just is. And so, again, coming back to this point is that, like, our perceptions of perfect all differ from one another. Our perceptions of our expectations around what's clean and what's dirty differ. Our expectations around what's fit and what's not fit, or what's healthy or healthy, all differ based on our filtering of our lens. And so what we want to do, and what I'm going to do, that will take you on a journey throughout this book, is to help you understand that you have this lens at this point in time, that we're going to expand that, and you become more aware, you increase your knowledge and understanding, and you go through this learning phase. But, during this learning phase, you'll need to also do some unlearning at the same time, and relearning and consolidating. So I find I can take so much information in, and then I need to put the book down, or I need to stop the podcast. And it's a bit like this, right? Me doing this, sharing, is that I couldn't just keep going. I could, but not coherently. It would have become more mumble jumbled, and I needed that pause. So yes, you'll need to have a pause to this book. You need to put it down and reflect. And that's important. That's part of the learning, but you're not stopped. So even if it takes you years to read this book, it doesn't, that's just the rate of learning for you, for where you're at, right? Because there could be some concepts that I'm sharing that are a bit far-fetched, and you're thinking, I can't sort of associate with that, depending on what age you are and what you've learned. But you'll develop that association over time. So let's get back to this thing of where we were, in terms of we're going through adolescence and we're finding ourselves, and then we're doing this compare and contrast. And so we're going to have different experiences. We all experience adolescence differently, right? From a biological perspective, from a experience perspective, we all experience from our own lens, and we go through growth at different phases depending on how much regulation we have from our parents and outer authorities, how much control they have over us, or how little control they have over us. And so our growth during this phase will vary from person to person. Those experiences that you have during adolescence will shape your connections. So for an example, so if you experience some mental health episodes, whether it be you're feeling disconnected, you're going to connect with people that are also feeling disconnected, because that you can relate to them. You have something in common. You're going to disconnect from those that feel connected, or those ones you felt connected to before but don't understand you now. But these people do understand you. So yes, at the same time, your connections are growing and trimming at the same time. It's both there. So you're trimming from people that don't understand you, and that could be your parents. They don't understand you because they're thinking, well, you used to be like this, but now you're like this. And so they're not evolving their thinking or their lens at the same pace that you're evolving your independence. And so they're stuck with the old you, and you're growing at a rate that they can't perceive or contemplate, or they don't want to, because they're attached to the old form of you. They were more liked what you used to do, and they're disconnecting with what you're doing now. But you will be connecting with others in that process that are doing the same thing. So whether that be drugs, like your parents could be disconnecting from you because they're judging you for doing drugs, but you're connecting with others that are doing drugs. And so you're forming new connections at the same time, feeling a bit disconnected from old connections. And that's life. That's going to continue through all stages of life, depending on life experiences, the paths you choose to go down, or up or down or around. this will shape your connections. You will continually connect with people that relate to you, understand you, and you'll disconnect with those that don't. You want to see relationships also in this state of flux. So as much as you're growing and finding yourself, or contracting and finding yourself, we do both to find ourselves, we also are doing the same with relationships. We're letting go of relationships or loosening up some relationships. That could be with your parents. And we're gaining new relationships, strengthening new relationships. And remember that in that process, you're finding yourself. So you might find that drugs aren't for you. And so therefore you disconnect with the drug buddies and reconnect with the anti-drug people, such as maybe your parents or other friends that didn't do drugs when you were doing drugs. You get what I mean? And this is the same with when we're connecting with what's important to us. So you might be discovering certain subjects that are important to you, and you're really developing a strong connection with those subjects, at the same time finding disconnected from other subjects that you dislike. And that is going to go with you through life. And that will be based on you finding you. And so this is going to morph and change over time and continue throughout life, right? And ultimately, there'll be periods of time where you feel very disconnected because you're going through this big state of transformation. But there is massive reconnections that are happening. You just may not be noticing that. So I just want you to be aware of that. It's always there. It's always entangled. And this gets back to quantum entanglement. And ultimately, as a human race, we are all entangled in some form in the web. And what this book is helping you to understand is that you're part of this web, part of this fabric. And at times you'll feel disconnected from the fabric. But as I said, connected to other parts of the fabric. Ultimately, I want you to, at the end of it, realize that you're on a journey to feel that you are one with the fabric. So you're not fighting it, you're not resisting it, you're not forcing it. You're enabling the flow of you to move with this fabric, or this connection of all human people and animals and everything, right? So, and this is that ultimate integration you'll feel. And look, this is a work in progress. I think part of your next life is part of this progress. So it's just, you'll leave this life at a certain level and a certain level of connectedness, and you'll take that into the next phase. And so just see it as a constant building and a rebuilding and a consolidation, but it's always this work in progress. And sometimes you'll feel very connected and you'll feel everything's going well, and then all of a sudden something happens in your life, and then there's part of it that's broken, or you feel that are disconnected. But as I said, the connections are strengthening with other parts and getting stronger. So as a whole, it's balanced and conserved, but you're either focused on one or the other, and most likely the loss or the disconnection. So I think I'm sort of really wrapping this sort of part up in terms of summarizing where the book is going and the journey that you'll go on. And then what I'm going to do is break this into chapters, of course, and chapters that you relate to. Certain chapters you won't relate to, but you may relate to later on in life, or you may have related to it in the past. But depending on where you're at, you'll relate to some chapters, really connect with some chapters, and find some chapters not so connecting, because everyone's at a different phase. But the chapter's going to be there and always there for you to revisit or come back to. So that is very much what I wanted to share in this first recording of the consolidation phase of the book called Feeling Broken. And it's all about reconnecting with self, and in that process, reconnecting with others, reconnecting with everything over time. And it's a journey. It's a lifelong journey. And as I said, there'll be periods where you feel disconnected. But that's just to strengthen the connections, or for you to value the connections more, because over time we can take for granted connections, and therefore we're not recognizing them for what they are and how important they are. And what can happen, these life events can make us recognize and go back to those connections. And I think COVID was a great example of that. It enabled people to pause and reflect, and they got to connect, and there was disconnection. So there was connection and disconnection. So certainly that disconnection from others enables you to connect stronger with yourself and do more reflection and more inner work. And so you're strengthening the connection with yourself, but at the same time feeling disconnected from the outside. But that enables that stronger reconnection. So as a connection as a whole, it's, there's no loss or gain. It's complete. But it depends on how we view it, right? So if we were focused on the disconnection from the external, then we'll feel disconnected. But if we were then just focused on strengthening the connection within, then we don't feel disconnected. We feel whole, and we feel that it is perfect as it is, right? And that's the whole thing, is we want to find the order amongst the chaos. So it's a matter of looking for that hidden order amongst the perceived chaos, because you're perceiving chaos because you're focused on that. But there's order there that you're not tuned into. And this book is going to help bring your conscious awareness to the order and see the whole, the entanglement of the whole. And so you don't perceive it as messy, you perceive it as it is. And that's life. So that's it, where I'll wrap it up here. I really appreciate you continuing to support my journey in writing this book on the Joyful Mate podcast. I've now got the book available for pre-sales. You can get a 50% discount by buying now and investing now, and get a 50% discount on the recommended retail price that it will launch at, and it may be even launching higher than what I've got it listed at. So it all depends, right? But at the moment, you'll be getting 50% of what I'm saying that it will be listed at, but it could be listed a whole lot higher. So therefore your discount could be a whole lot higher. But on the other side, it could be different too, in terms of it might not be a 50% discount. So I don't know. But anyway, I'd appreciate your support by going to thejoyfulmate.com and booking in your book, getting in on the pre-sales to really help encourage and help me to continue this journey, and to help me help you see fulfillment, and that you're complete as you are, nothing's missing. And so thank you for embracing this journey with me, and please continue your support of my journey by buying the book, getting in on the pre-sales, and getting your discount. Just go to joyfulmate.com. And thank you so much. Until next time, continue to discover the beauty of life.